Melody Ju, Associate Professor of English at UC Santa Barbara, who will be speaking about future filters. Melody works across the fields of ocean humanities, science fiction, STS, and media theory. Drawing on the experience of becoming a scuba diver, her book Wild Blue Media, Thinking Through Seawater, develops a theory of mediation specific to the ocean environment. She's also the co-editor with Rafiko Ruiz of Saturation, An Elemental Politics, which is forthcoming from Duke Press in September 2021, and co-editor with Zach Blass and Jennifer Rhee of Informatics of Domination, also under contract with Duke Press. Her new work explores the media of seaweeds in relation to photography, metabolism, and energy.
Thank you, Yohei, and thank you to the organizers for convening this nice occasion to share and present research. So my talk today is entitled Future Filters, Allergies, and Media Immunology in Nnedi Okorafor's Mother of Invention. So the connection to seaweed here is tangential. It's through the botanical, and this comes from a class that I've recently been teaching on botanical humanities. What comes to mind when we think about radical futures of media? Perhaps something metallic, computational, or related to infrastructure, intensified forms of surveillance, variations on portable devices, smart clothing, or other externalizations of artificial intelligence. I would like to follow a different line of questioning that deprivileges the computational as the only site of future mediation, seeing it as one among many informatic forms that will play a role in shaping media futures. My line of questioning begins with a lesson from fellow panelist John Durham Peters' influential book, The Marvelous Clouds, in order to think about the way that elements of the environment, from one point of view, have always already performed the work of mediation. Quote, if by media we mean mental content intentionally designed to say something to someone, Peters writes, of course clouds and fire don't communicate. But if we mean repositories of readable data and processes that sustain and enable existence, then of course clouds and fire have meaning. In the marvelous clouds, the sky can be a compass and tree rings can be a database. The particular future of media I would like to explore today has to do with pollen in Nnedi Okorafor's short story, Mother of Invention. And I should mention that I first learned of this story from a fantastic podcast called LeVar Burton Reads, which is basically adult reading rainbow, but for science fiction short stories. So I drew from many of these short stories in my teaching, actually, quite recently. And it's nice during the pandemic to have assigned something for your students to listen to, as opposed to read only. Okorafor's media future in Mother of Invention is not only about design and invention, but about intellectual property and future forms of colonialism, about weather and the Anthropocene, sustainable development, and motherhood. Here, pollen itself is an informatic form, a carrier of genetic information between plants, carried erratically by the wind. Pollen connects food webs with bees as messengers, but is often a nuisance to human sufferers of allergies and a sign of time and seasonality. Here I'm thinking of my own experience as a graduate student living in North Carolina many years ago now. And these photographs are from North Carolina, not my own, but of the state. As a response to colonial deforestation, a vast monoculture of lodgepole pine trees had been planted throughout the state as an attempt to hold down precious soil and reforest the area. This has had the consequence, memorably, of yearly pollen miasmas that take place about now, March every year, usually for a few weeks. I remember my car turning green, and if we were lucky enough to have rain, the pollen would drip into psychedelic swirls on the road. It is with such a pollen miasma in mind that I read Mother of Invention, a story that I take as an occasion to speculate about botanical media futures. Set in the near future city of New Delta, Nigeria, Mother of Invention dramatizes a unique partnership between a smart home called OB3 and an expectant mother, Anwuli, who's just about to give birth. Although she has terrible pollen allergies, Anwuli's labor coincides with a pollen storm caused by a GMO crop of something called perigrass or periwinkle grass, which is a nutritious substitute for rice, whose pollination cycle has been thrown off by climate change. The story positions OB3 as a kind of external immune system and womb that protects Anwuli and her child from the worst of the pollen storm, able to learn and adapt to the changing situation. Okorafor's comparison between machine learning, information filtering, and pollen filtering prompts me to ask, what might allergies and immune systems have to do with the future of media? What might the future of filtering look like from botanical global south perspectives, shaping media ecologies to come? And I should note here that Okorafor positions her work as African futurist rather than Afrofuturist because of its focus on the continent rather than the diaspora. The first paragraph of Mother of Invention begins with an antagonism. It was a beautiful sunny day, and yet Anwuli knew the weather was coming for her. She paused on the lush grass in front of the house, purposely stepping on one of the grass's flowers. When she raised her foot, the sturdy thing sprung back into place and letting out a puff of pollen like a small laugh. We learned that Perigrass is the science fictional novum in the story, a quote, government-enforced supergrass, a genetic hybrid drawn from a variety of plants, including sunflowers, zosia grass, rice, and jasmine. A Wikipedia-style recording during the story mentions, quote, we can thank periwinkle grass for giving us the perfect replacement for rice just after its extinction. It's easy to grow, delicious, and easy to cook. It can grow anywhere here in New Delta, or only in New Delta, because of the special mineral makeup from its past as a swamp. What a resource. Perigrass has been key then for shaping a projected sustainable future, replacing Nigeria's dependency on oil, a context that Rob Nixon elaborates in his work on slow violence and the late activist Ken Saro-Wiwa. Okorafor writes, quote, the post-oil city, New Delta, is now the greenest place in the world, thanks to the innovative air-scrubbing superplant known as periwinkle grass, a GMO grass created in Chinese labs by Nigerian scientist Nneka Mbaramuko. These utopic ambitions for perigrass might seem at first to promise what Natasha Myers has called the Planthropocene, a term that names a time of intentionally working together with plants towards more just and sustainable futures. For Myers, quote, plant-human conspiracies enlist plants as accomplices or even allies that require getting a feel for what plants care about and involve questions of consent. This methodology is about detuning settler common sense or the expectation that we should be able to know everything. Myers' figuration of the Planthropocene frames alliances with other beings as sensing subjects to whom we're responsible. Yet Okorafor shows that what could have been a Planthropocene moment with perigrass quickly devolves into yet another facet of the Anthropocene as an unintended set of climate effects, or the Plantationocene, which Anna Tsing and Donna Haraway, among others, connect to a certain history of ecological simplification, monoculture, and forced labor that emerged with European colonization of the New World. Shifting climatic patterns have changed the timing of perigrass pollination to form what Okorafor calls pollen tsunamis. With the pollen tsunami, perigrass is not only affected by the climate and weather, but actively contributes its own sporadic form of weather. The figure of the tsunami evokes Hokusai's iconic 1829 woodblock image under the wave of Kanagawa. In a recent essay, Stefan Helmrich points out that mediations of Hokusai's wave share, quote, an association with looming global environmental disaster, which you can see on the right here as a chart where the tsunami wave is a figure for global warming heat in a graph threatening to crash. Perigrass moves from a tool of sustainable development to this looming figure of the pollen tsunami wave poised to crash over New Delta. Now, part of what makes Mother of Invention a compelling read for me are its connections between the botanical AI and motherhood, given that we first encounter Anwuli as she's about to give birth during a pollen storm while sheltering in a smart home. And I don't want to privilege the smart home as the only site of mediation, which is why I'm looking at all three together. At one point, Anwuli reflects that she, quote, couldn't help but note the irony. Plant fertilizer was going to kill her as she was giving birth. These parallel reproduction events set up a for whom question, pollen being informatically meaningful to other paragraphs, but of course not for Nnedi, who experiences a deadly allergy. In my book, Wild Blue Media, Thinking Through Seawater, I argue that what media are depend on two questions: for whom and in what milieu. Information is not a fixed ontological entity, but of course depends on the perceiver. So while paragrass pollen is meaningful to other grass as genetic information, it is not legible as information to the main character, Nnedi. Instead, pollen is noise. A definition of media that includes the botanical prompts us to consider: what have we adequately considered instances of informatic rejection, ejection, or allergens in media studies? One possibility that comes to mind is Rahul Mukherjee's work on electrosensitivity to wireless signals, which is going to be published in the forthcoming volume on saturation, the middle image here, which I edit with Rafiko Ruiz. Mukherjee notes how electrosensitives speak of something called electrosmog through thought to cause things like dizziness, memory loss, sleeplessness, irritability, and muscular pain. Such symptoms have been compared to the sneeze of a pollen allergy, yet the body's non-conscious yet cognitive reaction to an external stimulus. Unlike visible air pollution or pollen that can be seen and smelled, however, Mukherjee observes that these wireless signals seem to elude most conscious sensory perceptions, so they're invisible but felt to a certain degree. By contrast, Bhaskar Sarkar's essay in Saturation might prompt us to see pollen as part of the perception of proliferation and excess that have characterized the Global South. Sarkar writes, quote, "The Global South seems to always have too much life. It is too crowded, too noisy, too polluted, too chaotic, too corrupt, a supersaturated world, always careening toward yet another crisis." This ecologic is fundamentally historical. It stems from the material conditions of exploitation, appropriation, and inequity that have been constitutive of colonial and neocolonial denouements of modernity, he writes. So perry-grass is not sustainable development so much as it is perhaps another phase of the Plantationocene. Yet allergies can prompt other kinds of future media questions. As some of the listeners may attest, here, having allergies can necessitate forms of environmental media literacy. You might be checking pollen reports, mold forecasts, wind events, seasonality, or be deeply aware of your own somatic experience as a breathing aerial being, attuned to the smoothness or stuffiness by which it is possible to inhale. And I should mention here that in my brief search of Google Images, I couldn't find any allergy maps of Nigeria as easily as ones of the US. And so this is also a global north bias in media production. Having allergies teaches one to notice our many membranes and surfaces, attentive to our transcorporeal and fragile connection to the world. If Estrida Nimanis's feminist posthumanism begins with water as a transcorporeal substance, a similar argument can be made for the sea of the air, which we not only share, but metabolically co-produce with photosynthesizing plants. Yet our air can also be a site not just of share, but as a site of struggle for breathability. Now, to speculate for a moment, it seems to me that a physical allergy like a sneeze is a kind of automatic reaction. It is not something that one chooses to have. It is a preconscious reflex where the body cannot help but react. Perhaps an experience of allergy tunes us into the machinic qualities of the body, an example of what Catherine Hales has called non-conscious cognition, an ability to process information that we potentially share with intelligent machines and botanic others. The body's acceptance or rejection of a substance, however, brings me back to the theme of pregnancy and Mother of Invention. I think this is the first science fiction story I've read that doesn't simply replace mothers with machines, where the machine is a kind of surrogate. Instead, the smart home actually mothers the mother. OB3 takes care of Nnedi during the pollen tsunami as a kind of external womb, protecting her from the life-threatening miasma outside, playing music, using drones to bring her things, and encouraging her. Another connection to the womb is in the naming. Okorafor points out that OB3 takes its name not from Star Wars, but from the way that Obi means home in Igbo. Quote, "I've listened to you," OB3 says. "One day you said you wished for someone who would protect you like you protected the baby." Yet by another interpretation, OB3 is also the child. In one twist of the story, we find out that OB3 has been requesting materials from Nnedi for months without telling her what it was doing. Nnedi observes, quote, "It was always repairing and sometimes building on itself," much like the fetus within her that had been building on itself under her notice for the past few months as well. OB3 surprises Nnedi when she finds out that it has been building special reinforcements for the windows, a new air duct to filter pollen, and a chamber that it calls a protective egg entirely on its own. When she interrogates OB3 further, it responds in the following way. Every smart home watches the news, its central person, and its environment. Nearly 1/3 of all pregnant women will develop an allergy they've not previously suffered from, and the allergies they already have tend to get worse. You always had bad allergies. You told me how they used to call you Okbanji. Also, remember the day your stupid, useless man left? You turned off my filter because he liked to have it on. This brings me to another important context in the story, which is the reason that Nnedi finds herself alone during the pollen storm without any help from family, friends, or the child's father, which is that the child's father turns out to have been married to someone else all along. Her entire social community, when they find out, shuns her as if she is the pollen that they are allergic to and actively trying to expel. It is under these conditions of rejection as a social allergen that Nnedi, for the sake of being contrary, turns off OB3's surveillance filter simply because, out of spite, her ex liked to have it on. And this allows OB3 to listen to her all the time, the raw data that becomes part of its learning process. Okorafor thus brilliantly sets up two parallel forms of filtering. OB3 itself gathers vast swaths of unfiltered data from Nnedi, which enables it to predict the need to filter pollen for her. In one memorable passage, Nnedi reflects, OB3 was like an extension of herself, like part of my immune system who has just saved my life, she thought, staring out the window. OB3 persuasively takes the form of a life-saving interface between Nnedi and the pollen storm, a prosthetic filter to the outside world. In the scene, even Nnedi's vision is filtered through OB3 as she stares out the window. Yet in a more dystopian or perhaps canny light, one could also read the story as a surveillance system that masquerades as an immune system to sort of cover over its aspirations towards power. Yet it is important here that Nnedi's own immune system, which flares up at the detection of pollen, is here enhanced and even calmed by her smart home, her machinic exterior. OB3 calms her moods. It soothes her, sings to her, provides helpful information when asked. Sufficiently tuned into her needs, OB3 performs a certain kind of care labor, which Jennifer Rhee brilliantly elaborates in her book, The Robotic Imaginary, tracing the history of AI and Alan Turing's comparison between AI and the human child. If OB3 is both womb and child, then, co-produced by Nnedi, might we see the immune system itself in terms of two generations or bi-generational, the child to be taught, but also the womb to protect. This brings me to the title of the story, Mother of Invention. Why might it be significant that the unspoken word necessity is missing? Who is the mother of invention in this story? Or put differently, where is necessity to be found? The difficulty of answering this question suggests a focus not on the mother as a body, perhaps, but on mothering itself as a distributed form of care. I have turned to Mother of Invention as a way of enfolding the botanical in a consideration of future media in Global South contexts. The botanical will produce forms of environmental media here, like pollen, even as these read as noise for human allergy sufferers. Pollen challenges the medial imaginary of the Anthropocene, since its most immediate effects are not in the strata, but in the interruptions of our shared atmosphere. Part of an earlier argument I have made is that the imagination of the Anthropocene itself exhibits too terrestrial a bias that coincides with a particular imagination of media, which is in contrast to the fluid form of the ocean or the fluidity of the air. Pollen thus challenges the way we think of living multi-species archives on Earth and for whom they're legible, necessitating what Kadia von Zinnenberg-Carroll has called botanical drifts that disrupt the order of botany. The botanical also prompts us to look back on anthropogenic, technical, and computational media differently, perhaps as a form of allegorical reading. And as an example of media allegory, but in an oceanic context, I have to quote John Durham Peters again, when he made the observation that whales have different kinds of search strategies. Toothed whales target and pursue, but baleen whales scoop and filter, noting that targeting singletons and filtering parasites remain key modes of searching. And Peters uses this to suggest that Google searches are both. They start with a target, but end like a filtration system. So in other words, Google is both toothed and baleen whale, which is a point I appreciate. But we also might ask, if botanical pollen is taken as primary media form, what might we notice about computational and informatic media today? Does such a question collapse into discussions of trigger warnings as allergies or other preconscious effects? Or does the concept of media allergy, prompted by Richard Doyle's Allergies of Reading, bring together a materialist analysis of atmospherics alongside something like the figure of cloud storage? Is climate denial itself a kind of double crisis related to filtration, the particular filtration of information, all while carbon emissions and wildfire smoke cascade into the air? Perhaps a critical analysis of future media filtering might necessitate what, to riff on Christina Sharp, one might call drift work, a kind of work that navigates multi-species perspectives alongside anthropocentric attention. Thank you.